On behalf of Smith & Zone and our guest speakers, I kindly welcome you in today's webinar. My name is Egbert Dikkers and I'm Global Director Sustainability at Smith & Zone. We are pleased that you decided to tune in for today and we look forward to engage with you towards a sustainable ladder value chain. Welcome. Today is the second webinar in a series of 2 in which we focus on environmental sustainability. In the first episode, on September 30, we focused on understanding the basics of sustainability, which we guided you through different concepts. Topics included the bio-based versus fossil-based, different product life cycle models, biodegradability, compostability, circularity, carbon footprint, and we briefly touched the concept of life cycle assessments. Before we will enter this webinar, I will briefly introduce Smith & Zone for those of you who do not yet know us. Smith & Zone is a 7th generation family-owned business that is fully dedicated on developing and marketing innovative chemistry to create sustainable leather, including all the required material and physical characteristics. We are proud on the fact that on the occasion of our 200-year anniversary this year, King Willem-Alexander of the Netherlands has granted Smith & Zone the royal predicate. But going back to today's topic again, sustainability is a complex topic. And as a chemical company, we experience an increasing focus on sustainability and the need for supporting data. It is therefore that Smith & Zone has an internal life cycle assessment working team that defined and is executing an internal LCA roadmap. And this series of webinar is a result of this Smith & Zone LCA roadmap. Smith & Zone has been organizing different webinars, sharing our knowledge and supporting the ladder value chain in a better understanding of the challenges and the different sustainability concepts in order to make better decisions. And today's webinar is focusing on understanding the value of an LCA to get a better understanding what is needed to perform it and be able to interpret the outcomes in the right way. And this webinar is based on an earlier frequently asked questions document that has been set up by Smith & Zone. And today, Dr. Yuji Ma, our senior R&D scientist, will explain to you in more detail the concept of life cycle assessments. We are also pleased that we have 2 guest speakers, both experts in their field. Mr. Fernando Bellezzi, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Prime Asia, is explaining why Prime Asia is involved in LCA, what their findings are, and how Prime Asia is using LCA to manage its impacts and to support its sustainability goals. Our second guest speaker is Mr. Federico Brugnoli. Federico is the founder and director of Spin360, a company involved in supporting companies in the ladder value chain to develop sustainable business models and innovative solutions. Federico will explain how an LCA can help making the right decisions in choosing materials like leather and the importance of using the right starting data, starting from the allocation of the cow. At the time of registration, you had the opportunity to raise your questions, and many of these questions will already be answered in this webinar. And we will have limited time at the end to answer some of the remaining questions. In case your question cannot be answered today, we will get back to you separately. For now, I would like to pass the word to Yuji Ma, our senior R&D scientist. So Yuji, I would like to give you the word. Please go ahead.
Yuji, you are muted.
Yeah.
We can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry, there was some sound problem, and I will start again. Thanks for the introduction, and you again for joining our webinar. I will start with some repetitions of our first webinar on some of the essential contents. Let's begin with the basic theories of LCA. LCA is a methodological tool to quantitatively analyze the environmental impacts of products or services throughout their life cycles. LCA is carried out in standardized ways according to ISO standards 14040 and 14044. As for materials or products, it's starting from its origin until its end of life, which includes raw material extraction, manufacturing and processing, packaging, transportation or distribution, usage, and final disposal. The illustration displayed on this slide shows the typical 6-stage product life cycle model, sometimes 5 stages when you combine manufacturing and packaging, from cradle to grave. But LCA studies can also be carried out using other product life cycle models, which will be explained later down in my presentation. The LCA study goes much further than global warming or the CO2 emissions and includes many impact categories, including toxicity, for example, those to humans, water and air pollution, ozone depletion, depletion of fossil fuels, etc. We will cover some of the impact categories in short further down this presentation. It is good to mention that no material is sustainable or unsustainable by definition. And please remember, bio-based doesn't equal to sustainable. Why is LCA important in evaluating environmental sustainability? Here we are showing you some of the answers. Firstly, it is a recognized and standardized way to measure environmental sustainability. It can provide comprehensive and quantitative insights into environmental impacts. It can also highlight inefficiencies and improvement areas across life cycle phases. And it also helps the organization in setting corporate ESG or environmental social governance goals. An LCA study contains 4 phases, which are explained in more detail in the ISO methods I just mentioned. The 4 phases are namely goal and scope definition, life cycle inventory analysis or LCI, life cycle impact assessments or LCIA, and interpretation. In the first phase of goal and scope definition, the intended use, audience, the product systems, the functional units and system boundaries, and allocation procedures, assumptions are all defined. In the second phase, inventory analysis, data collection and calculations are performed to quantify relevant inputs and outputs of a product system. In the third phase of impact assessments, the significance of potential environmental impacts using the LCI results are evaluated. The detailed explanation of the terminologies of LCIA can be found in the ISO methods 14044. The last phase of LCA is the life cycle interpretation. In the following slides, we will zoom into some key aspects in this whole process. LCA study and LCA results can be used in many application areas, such as in product development, process improvements, strategic planning, and communications. Let us begin with some aspects in the first phase of an LCA study, which is goal and scope definition. The first important aspect we would like to touch on in this webinar is functional unit. A product system may have more than one functions. Which function is to be covered in the LCA study will be defined. Related to the function to be studied, a functional unit is the quantified description of the performance requirements that a product system fulfills. To make things more straightforward, functional unit can be described when you have answered the following questions. What, how much, for how long, or how many times, where and how well. In the context of a tannery that is focused on leather making, a functional unit can be, for example, the amount of water, energy, or chemical consumed per square meter of a specific type of finished leather. Our guest speaker, Mr. Brunioni, will also touch on this specifically. The second important concept that I would like to spend some time on is the so-called system boundaries. System boundaries are conceptual lines dividing the systems to be studied from everything else. It is very important for an LCA study because it determines which unit processes will be included or excluded from an LCA study. Here, a figure is shown on different product life cycle models to give you an idea on this. In the beginning slide, we've explained the processes included in the typical cradle-to-grave LCA. Next to cradle-to-grave, that covers the entire life cycle of a product from raw materials acquisition to the so-called cradle, all the way to its final disposal or the so-called grave. Other product life cycle models include cradle-to-gate or cradle-to-cradle. Cradle-to-gate means partial product life cycle from cradle to factory gate. Cradle-to-cradle, on the other hand, can be viewed as a special type of cradle-to-grave, where the final disposal step is a valorization process, such as recycling. Recycling provides a material stream that can re-enter as new raw materials, which could be a start or cradle of a new life cycle. It might be good to mention that in many cases, the initially defined system boundaries will likely need to be redefined during an LCA study. To give you a practical example, we will explain the concept of life cycle models via the illustrated example of leather shoes. Leather shoes are made starting from raw materials obtained from the side stream, which is the hide of the food industry, starting from cattle breeding. After the manufacturing or production process, hides are transformed into leather crusts and eventually finished leather that enters a shoe factory, where shoes are made. When shoes are worn out, they will be disposed through either a landfill or maybe also a composting process or recycling process. The recycled parts, which could be, for example, a plastic shoe sole, can be used as raw material to enter a new life cycle of shoes. When LCA is considered, from cattle breeding to shoe factory would be viewed as cradle to gate. From cattle breeding to disposal of the shoes would be viewed as cradle to grave. And from cattle breeding to recycled parts of shoes entering a new life cycle would be viewed as cradle to cradle. Let's now move on to aspects related to the second phase, life cycle inventory analysis. Data requirements for an LCA is explained in ISO 14044. LCA is built around data. Data quality defines the reliability and consistency of the study and is thus of ultimate importance. It is often said that success factor of an LCA is data, data, data. Due to this reason, it is always considered desirable to collect primary data that directly concerns the studied product or system. Collected data should address certain time coverage, geographical coverage, and technology coverage with precision, consistency, representativeness, completeness, and reproducibility. When collecting primary data is not entirely possible, sometimes it is necessary to use secondary data, which may come from literatures or be the average data on inputs and outputs of a unit process found in an LCI database, such as EcoInvent or Gabi. Sometimes it's necessary to use secondary data in combination with primary data. Data collection can be an iterative process that may also be resource intensive. LCA data enables the assessments of life cycle impacts or LCIA. The important elements in this phase is the selection of impact categories, assignment of the LCI results to these impact categories, and calculate category indicator results. According to environmental mechanism, the inventory results can be translated to assigned to midpoint categories that we encounter quite often, which are listed on this slide, including climate change, eutrophication, land use, resource depletion, acidification, ozone depletion, ecotoxicity, ionizing radiation, etc. In the next slide, we will give you an explanation on the selection of impact categories that we frequently encounter. It is good to know that not all impact categories listed here need to be included in every LCA study. The selection of impact categories is closely reflecting the goal and scope of the study. The above-mentioned midpoint impact categories can then be further translated into endpoint impact, such as impacts on human health, forests, or other natural resources. It is also good to mention that the assignment of LCA results to impact categories may not always be straightforward. Depending on the environmental mechanism, LCI results may relate to more than one impact category. Thus, careful considerations must be made in the process. LCIA always involves classification and characterization or calculation of indicator results. In addition, optional elements such as normalization and weighting can be performed, for example, to simplify communication. Normalization means the calculation of the magnitude of category indicator results relative to reference information, and weighting means to convert and possibly aggregate indicator results across impact categories using numerical factors so that communications can be largely simplified. So in this slide, we are giving you a further explanation on the selection of impact categories. The impact category of climate change, which we encounter most frequently these days, is used as an indicator of potential global warming due to emissions of greenhouse gases, including but not restricted to carbon dioxide. Eutrophication refers to the enrichment of ecosystems, including freshwater, marine, and terrestrial ecosystems with nutritional elements due to the emission of nitrogen or phosphor-containing compounds. It will lead to excessive biomass such as algal growth, which disrupts the natural functioning of the ecosystem and reduces biodiversity. Treating water as a unique natural resource, water depletion or water usage is an environmental indicator probably quite easy to understand. It describes the relative amount of water used based on regionalized water scarcity factors. Similarly, resource depletion, usually divided into two subcategories, namely depletion of abiotic resources, minerals and metals, and depletion of abiotic resources, fossil fuels, are used to quantify the depletion of natural non-fossil, including minerals and metals, as well as fossil fuel resources. In addition to those explained here, there are many more other impact categories. All of the impact categories are dealing with the following three endpoint impact indicators, being either human health, biodiversity, or ecosystems, and natural resources. We now reach the final phase of an LCA study, which is lifecycle interpretation. In this step, not only the significant issues based on the result of LCI and LCIA will be identified, a critical evaluation of the completeness and consistency of the work will also be checked, followed by conclusion and recommendations related to the intended application. It is important to stress that the interpretation should always relate to the goal of the study. With this slide, we would like to give you a simple example of the interpretation of the LCA data on genes production. If the study is aiming at evaluating the environmental impact of wet process of genes production, as shown in the red color, the conclusion from this result would be that it has a big impact on global warming potential, but a very small one on eutrophication. However, if fabric production is the main scope of the study, as indicated by the green color, the conclusion is obviously very different, as it has equally big impacts on both categories. Now I would like to pass on the words to Mr. Fernando Balesi, Chief Sustainability Officer of Prime Asia, who will explain to you in much more detail on the LCA examples of leather. Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yuji, very much for your very detailed explanation about life cycle assessment. I think that makes my life easier, so I can jump into our examples, our project. I hope you can see my screen here. Just give me 1 second. Yes. And also I would like to thank Smith and Zoom and your entire team for organizing this very interesting webinar and for inviting us to be here today. I just want to start this presentation. I don't need to explain what LCA is. Yuji has done a great job on that, but it's important to understand why we think this was an important decision for Prime Asia in terms of assessing our environmental impacts. The way it's detailed, the LCA is the way it shows the different impacts across the life stage of a product, help us to have better insights on how we can achieve our corporate sustainability goals. We have very clear goals where we want to be in the future. So LCA was perceived as the right tool to help us make that management. And not only that, we've seen that there are a lot of debates around leather and the impact of the environmental impact of leather, and very often those debates are made around assumptions, outdated information. So we thought LCA, an updated LCA based on primary data collection would help us to also participate on those debates. And to give you a better idea of what we are talking about, what has been developed by Prime Asia, we run what we can, I think, say that it's the most comprehensive LCA ever performed in the leather industry. I don't need to go through the methods used. Yuji has explained them well, but it's interesting to emphasize that we thought it was very important to run LCAs of a number of products that would represent most of what we do at Prime Asia. So in this LCA, we covered 3 different materials from Australia, Brazil, and USA. We covered 6 different retaining and finishing formulations, which represents more than 50% of what we do in Prime Asia. And to do that, we collected data from 3 different slaughterhouses, 3 wet blue tanneries, our 2 retaining and finishing facilities in China and Vietnam. So we're talking about data collection in 5 different countries, covering 11 different supply chain configurations. Just to give an idea of the size of this work, we got information from 56 machines, 266 process phases, and more than 3,000 data points collected. So it was a huge work. It's important to mention that we perform this in partnership with Spin 360. Federico Brugnoli is going to be presenting today, and you're going to see that some of the things we talk about is similar because we follow the same approach and methods. The only thing that was not covered here is transportation to the footwear factory and off life. So we are talking about a cradle to gate approach, and in the end the LCA resulted in more than 27,000 indicators, which is incredible. It's like we can call it a piece of intelligence. We have this database that we can use to help us manage our impacts. I don't need to go over the environmental indicators. Yuji also explained well what they are. It's just important to emphasize that we had to select a wider group of indicators so we could work both with the environmental product declarations in Europe, but also with HIG in the US, so we could report our results in different ways. Just, I think as an example of what has been done in leather, we need to share some different views with you so you understand how we can use that to manage our sustainability goals. The first interesting part, which I want to emphasize, is that we can extract what comes from raw materials and what comes from core processes. So everything you see here in green are the results from our core processes. What you see in orange is coming from raw materials. So we have 2 bars here that is related to global warming, then eutrophication, abiotic depletion, and water use. We don't need to go into each of those results, but it's interesting to understand. For example, in global warming potential, we have 53% of our impact coming from the raw material. So if we want to use if we want to improve those 53%, we have to work with our supply chain. Now we have 46% of our global warming potential, the global warming potential from our ladder coming from our core processes. So we have a lot of things that we can also work within our gates to get those things improved. And we can do similar assessments to eutrophication, abiotic depletion, water used, or any of the 14 impact categories that we mentioned before. But it's an interesting view. And not only that, what I love about LCAs, and Federico is going to talk a little bit more about that, is the level of details we get. This is one of the tables that shows one of the impacts. So we are talking here about global warming potential for one of the products we assessed. And here you see that we have the impacts reported by products life cycle stage. So we have raw materials, we have beam housing, tanning, post-tanning, finishing. But we know also if the impact is coming from water usage, water consumption, thermal energy, electric energy, chemicals, transportation, and many other categories. And not only that, these are what we call aggregated categories. For example, when you go to chemicals, you start drilling down, you have another 100 different lines, and we start seeing where the impacts are. And with that information, it's how we can use it to manage our environmental impacts and to get better. This is the second step we take after we know where the impacts are, where we separate what comes from the supply chain from what comes from our core process. We can start discussing the hotspots. Federico will also cover these, but you see here, for example, that global warming potential, the two top areas are related to electric energy and to chemicals. So if we address those first, we will have better results. We can do the same for eutrophication, abiotic depletion, water use, and that allows us to create improvement hypotheses. If we know where to address our environmental impact, we know how to better solve it. And this is an example of how we can do. We can find projects that we can implement in our upstream supply chain, things related to chemicals, electric energy. And because we have that piece of intelligence I mentioned in the beginning, because we have that database with more than 27,000 different indicators, we can project what this improvement hypothesis would cause. So let's say if we implement those hypotheses, those actions I just mentioned, we can project, for example, the kind of improvements we'll get. So we can understand if we are going in the right direction or not before we start implement those actions. That's the beauty of what we are doing. This is why we are doing that. As I mentioned, we have set of sustainability goals. Every 5 years, we are renewing those goals. And that information that is yielded from the assessments can tell us if we are going in the right direction, if we're going to reach our goals, but also if we have to review our goals. For example, we can see where we can be more aggressive, where we can have more aggressive goals. Sometimes we can also see that in some areas, maybe we need next time we review to take a different approach. So that's the interesting thing. And in the end of the day, what it creates a situation where we can understand our impacts as a first step and the most important, but then we can start discussing those improvement actions. We can project the enhancements, as I mentioned, before we implement them to see if they are in line with our sustainability goals. After we do that, we validate, we see that those are the right projects, we start implementing them, we start reducing our environmental impact, then we can assess again and we can start this cycle again. So it's really a continuous improvement approach that we take, and we use LCA as a tool for that continuous improvement. Another thing we thought was important, it's about sharing the results with different stakeholders, with our customers. And we decided at this point that a good way of doing it was to share via the Higg index, the MSI in the US. So what we did after our LCA was done, we had to hire a third-party review to check the method, to check the approach used, to check the report and see if it was consistent with the most recognized methods around the world. After the third-party review was concluded, we submitted to HIG. They run a second set of reviews, so we can say that our research has been third-party reviewed twice. And this is important because it adds credibility to what we have done. And only after that, the results are uploaded to the MSI. And by getting the results uploaded into the MSI, it's very important because we get the results available. Anybody can access the MSI. You just need to create your own user and you can have access to that information. And why have we followed this path? Because we need our customers to receive our data, but we need also the market to see how leather can be done sustainably. These are the results we have published. So here we published two different results, one for steers and one for South American hides. So you have different sets of information for each of those results, and you can compare with the global average, the global leather average, and see the efficiencies that you have by using Prime Asia leathers. It's important, though, to emphasize here that there are two things that we need to have in mind. One, that efficient tanneries, they do good, responsible leathers, but also that we need to be very careful when we are using assumptions, when we are using outdated information to do LCAs. We believe that 50% of what we have here comes from our efficiencies, but we also believe those differences with the global average are related to the use of outdated and excessive assumptions. So the main take, efficient tanneries can do very sustainable materials and materials that are interesting to be used in different industries. So thank you very much. I hope I don't have run over my time, and now I'm gonna give the word to Federico Brugnoli. Thank you. You are muted, Federico.
Being the last is not very easy. Thank you very much, Fernando, for giving me the floor, because many things have been said already, but I hope I can be of help in clarifying at least some main points that have to do with the life cycle assessment. I hope everybody is able to see my screen. If not, Fernando, please tell me.
We can see it.
Okay, very good, very good. So you see that the title of my presentation is called Life Cycle Thinking, and I will explain you why. So first of all, we speak. I'm not myself going into details on the definition of life cycle assessment, but often it is needed to address this kind of events, since the discipline is not very well known yet. My contribution today will also be going into details in some key technical elements that need to be addressed when we speak about life cycle assessment. So first of all, I think it is important to understand that being life cycle assessment such a complex discipline, there is a need for not only standardization in terms of general rules, but also standardizations that are product related. So that in the course of the past, I would say 10 years, the leather industry has been working in the definition of what we call product category rules. These product category rules are defining exactly how to perform specific calculations and also explaining basically why. So as Yuji was saying before, one of the important parameters that we consider in the product category rules is the functional unit. But before that, let me say that at present, we can count on 3 main product category rules The first one being the so-called product environmental footprint category rules. This is a document issued by the European Commission after the work of that lasted, if I remember well, more than a year, of a committee, the so-called technical secretariat, in which I was involved as well. And some LCA studies were carried out. Second set of product category rules is within the system that was mentioned before by Fernando of the international EPD. EPD stands for Environmental Product Declaration. In this case, this EPD system has been favored by the action of SWEDAC, that is the Swedish the Swedish body for classification and certification. And last but not least, there is also a third set of product category rules that has been issued by the Technical Committee of Leather in the framework of the European Standardization System, CEN. So all of these are converging to say that one functional unit, or better to say one reference flow, the reference flow for leather should be on the surface in case of finished leather, as well as in terms of kilograms when we speak about sole leather. When we speak instead of system boundaries are very important. Why? Because it is depending on the definition of system boundaries, whether agriculture and animal farming are to be included or not in a leather LCA. The debate has been very long. It is still running. There are many different opinions on this, but opinions when it comes to science don't count very much. So we see that animal farming and slaughtering, so-called upstream life cycle stages, are to be considered both in the case of the European Commission PEFCRs and the EPD system. While the CEN standard that was produced in an exercise a long time ago focused more on the so-called core processes, therefore from the exit gate of the slaughterhouse until the gate of the tannery. So that we can say that among these three documents, two follow an approach from cradle to gate, and one is following an approach from gate to gate, I would say, even if this third approach is not very well accepted internationally. So now it comes to the point that was also mentioned by Egbert before of allocation. Why allocation is important? Because the values that are related to allocation are determining how much some processes that are coming before, in case of leather, in the agriculture and animal farming, will be impacting the leather as a product. Allocation occurs when there are some processes, such as animal farming, that are multifunctional. And therefore, a single process can serve many different processes downstream. Case of animal farming, of course, meat is the most important representative determining product, and other co-products are used in different supply chains. So why is allocation important? Allocation is important because we are looking at values that may determine up to 50%, if not more, of the final impact of leather. So the different methodologies of allocation are coming, for example, from farming, the so-called biophysical approach, where that is based on the protein content that are exiting the farming sites. In case of reproducing animals, these biophysical allocation factors are always saying that 88% of the impact should be allocated to milk, while 12% should be allocated to live animals. This is, of course, not true when we're speaking about reproducing animals, non-reproducing animals. In those cases, for farms that are only growing animals for meat, the factors have to be, and the environmental impacts have to be allocated 100% to live animals. And then when we come to the slaughterhouse, the PFCR is guiding us to the concept of allocation ratio. This means you see this 0.51. This is the result of a calculation that is done taking into consideration two factors: the economic allocation, how much a hide values with respect to an overall animal, and the mass fraction. So this means that if we take a 0.51 as an allocation factor on leather, we will have more or less 6% of the value of the impact generating in animal farming. There were a lot of mistakes in doing these calculations, where there was also a misunderstanding in terms of 0.40 whatsoever. That was the result of 12% of live animal times 3.5%. But this is not correct. When we get instead into a tannery, then the hide content, the amount of proteins that is going exactly on finished leather, is the most important criteria for allocation. Why we speak about life cycle thinking, and I will be very, very quick on this, is because we think that the numbers that are coming out of these assessments are not the end of the work, but rather they are the start of an improvement plan. As Fernando was saying, our approach is to go very much in detail into the analysis of all the different factors that are contributing to the generation of an impact. So we start from the factory, we analyze machine per machine and process per process. The data structure that we use for doing life cycle assessments and life cycle management projects are very, very, very similar to the ones that are used for industrial costing. So that in projects that we are currently running, we see that improving environmental efficiency means also saving money. I'm not going to go again on the different impact indicators, and Fernando has very well explained the standard data structure that we use for reporting. Keep in mind that this is just reporting, where we have a multitude of data for each of the single life cycle stage, so that we can basically project and optimize the impact of decisions on the most important contributors to impact. Again, here you may recognize some similarities also in the graphical aspects. The different gradation of yellow or orange or red are taking the attention of the viewer on the importance of the different factors on to be improved. So this is what we call a hotspot analysis that is always linked with the what-if analysis. That is the idea and a kind of simulation on the impact of different decisions on environmental improvement measures. And this is how an environmental footprint improvement plan can look like, defining a set of objectives and an overall improvement in time. So just to say that we are also working and developing machines. This is an example of a drum that are including life cycle assessment, data collection and data elaboration measures while working in real time. It is the so-called smart drum approach that is an enabler of radical and incremental improvement. I don't know if I've been good enough to stay in my time, but this is everything I have to say.
Thank you very much, Federico. Very nice in time. Thank you very much. And yeah, we are coming to the end of our webinar, and I would really like to thank our speakers, Yuji Ma, Fernando Bellesi, and you, Federico Brugnoli. And we are confident that this webinar is giving you more insights what an LCA is, that there is a structural approach of executing it, that it requires a lot of data points. Fernando has also shown that the quality of the data is very much determining the quality of the outcomes, and that's just to name a few basic points. Interpreting an LCA is really critical, just like that you should be very careful of using an LCA to compare materials or to compare chemicals. An LCA provides different data sets that are the starting points to identify environmental hotspots and areas for improvement, just like Federico was also showing on one of his last slides. We also experienced that LCAs are supporting more qualified debates about the environmental impact of leather, because that's good. Because otherwise it will remain to stay opinions, and I think we have a duty together as an industry as well to ensure that we have scientific data to back up that leather is a material choice. Well, today you have heard that tanneries as well as chemical companies are discovering how an LCA can support them in further improvements. And yeah, I think it is time that we are coming to some questions. Again, I would like to thank Yuji, Fernando, and Federico for their time. We still have time for some questions. We already got some questions, and I see it here as well. Fernando, I would like to give the first question to you, and that is a question. Do you have a benchmark implemented to your LCA, so to the Prime Asia LCA, or is it just focused on your company's production data without comparison? Can you take this question?
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Egbert. I think there are two important and two interesting parts on that discussion. First, yes, we considered the information to better manage ourselves. So more important than benchmarking with other materials, we are looking how that information can make us a better company, a more efficient company. So when we talk about 27,000 different indicators, it gives us a lot of insights of how we can become a better company. In terms of benchmarking, yes, we do use some benchmarking tools. As I mentioned, we published our results on HIG that provides already benchmark for leather, for other materials, and that helps us to make those kind of comparisons. But we need to be very careful, because as I try to be clear on that question, we need to be very careful when using outdated information assumptions, because those things drives the LCA results very high. So sometimes you may be comparing with different, let's say you may be comparing apples with orange. Not only that, the thing that Federico was talking about, allocation, makes things also difficult, because you know the allocations you are using, but when you talk about different materials, different products, you don't know what approach they are taking. But yeah, there are some ways to benchmark.
Yeah, thank you very much, Federico. The next question, Yuji, I would like to give to you. What is the main reason why Smith & Zone is focusing on LCAs?
Hi. So I would like to give a short answer to this question, because we talk about sustainability. For our family business, sustainability is really in our core strategy. Of course, when we would like to work on sustainability, we would like to also calibrate how we are doing currently using a standardized method. And this method also should be broadly accepted. And that's why we chose to use LCA. And in this way, we can also create a roadmap for improvements and get data available for others, for example, downstream partners who are really seriously interested in and also engaged in this topic.
Thank you very much, Yuji. There's the next question. Federico, I think I will give this question to you. The question is, can you give more insights in the efforts in manpower, time investments that you need to do when you execute an LCA? In other words, how doable is it to perform an LCA? Can you take this one?
Yes, Herbert. So until now, we have been speaking about large amount of data, 27,000 indicators, and so on and so forth. It is to be said that all of these are coming out of some precise calculations, which are, if not fully, highly automated. No, and therefore the efforts that are required for an LCA by a company that wants to perform an LCA on one of its products are mainly concentrated in two phases. One, of course, is data collection, in which there is a need also of some kind of interdisciplinarity, because it's not only the environmental area of a company that is working on that, but also production. So there is some kind of effort at the beginning while data are being collected. And then it's going to be the role of the LCA practitioner or consultant, such as we are, to elaborate all the numbers and come back to the company with the indicators. Because then, yes, the second and probably also most important part of the work that sees the tannery very highly involved is on data interpretation. And therefore, on one side, we have the technical team that is cooperating with us in collecting data, and there is some kind of back and forth, even remotely. But then there is a higher involvement of the management team, even of the board of directors, of many times, on taking actions, interpreting the results, and setting up improvement actions based on that. And it is very, very interesting to see how much the high level management of companies is looking at these numbers with interest. And this is also an experience we had with Prime Asia in the past.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting answer, Federico, because I also think, and I also experienced that within our company, for instance, and making the decision to do an LCA is one thing. But making that decision, you should already think about what are you going to do with the outcome. Huh? Are you also going to be able and willing to take the next step, which is to really use it as a roadmap for future improvement, just like Fernando was saying as well. So
one last point regarding benchmarks and comparisons. I always say that the most important comparison is yourself against yourself. So is which are the improvements of an environmental performance in time of a company, not having to deal or to look at benchmarks too much, because then with benchmarks you may feel relaxed.
Yeah, it's true. The next question, which I would like to give to Fernando, maybe that's a bit different one, but what is the biggest obstacle, Fernando, for replacing plastic? I'm not sure if I should give that to you, but taking in mind that you are producing leather and not plastic, maybe you are the best one to take this one.
I think first it's will. You know, you gotta be willing to do that. But if you have the will, the other things you can get organized. I believe the world is going through a very critical time, and climate change is probably one of the biggest challenges we have ahead of us, and we all are responsible to dealing with that. And more and more we hear that there's no way of solving that if we are still extracting fossil fuels. So we need to find ways of replacing fossil fuels, and plastic has become a big part of that extraction. I believe, and that's not only for leather. I call here like a league of the natural materials. I believe that we, as a supply of natural materials such as leather, we need to work more and more to make leather more efficient, use less fossil fuels in that process. so we can offer an alternative to plastic. But that's not enough. We need to think in a more holistic way. We need to think of other materials. So it's about leather, it's about cotton, it's about wool, it's about mushrooms. We need to think as much as we can how we can use more natural materials. What we cannot is start using outdated information, is starting using incomplete LCAs to compare different materials and believe that plastic is such a good thing. There is no such a good thing called plastic. So we need to use this natural materials league to replace plastic.
Yeah, I think it's a very good answer, Fernando. And I think it's also a challenge for us as an industry to really find the scientific data that will convince the brands but also give knowledge to consumers to understand why they should focus on bio-based natural materials instead of synthetics, which is sometimes a bit funny messaging. I have another question, and that's maybe a bit in line with that as well. And maybe, Federico, I give that one to you. There's a question, what can we collectively do to ensure that the benchmark LCA facts are correct and valid? And how can we avoid that brands and OEMs continue to use outdated and incorrect facts and data? Could you take this one, Federico?
Yes, well, the answer is pretty simple, Egbert, and I think you also know that there is a part of representatives or stakeholders of the industry that is already interacting with HIG, for example, to solve this problem. And the answer is act and to do something. HIG is currently in the position of, I would say, openly receive data that are not outdated. There will be an exercise starting soon, hopefully, exactly going in this direction. So to collect information that are available and data that are not so old and not outdated, to try to be in line with the results that Fernando was showing before. Having said so, we also have to understand that probably this is not going to be, and I'll try to be as light as possible on this because it's a very delicate point. This is not going to be the only point of decision or the only factor to be considered by brands when taking certain directions. So currently there is a huge debate following the Volvo announcement on phasing out from leather and going exactly on plastics. The reason for that being that someone is questioning the real sustainability of this choice. So I always say that numbers at a certain point become politics. And this is also probably the case, even if the industry as a whole and each individual company should act for that. The industry as a whole to testify that the results are better than what is now projected internationally, and each individual company to support this collective work through continuous improvement.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Federico. I think it's a good answer, and it's also illustrating the difficult situation we as an industry are facing with the brands, because it's a matter of having the right information available and also interpreting the information in the right way. I think we can debate about this topic for many more hours. I noticed that there are various questions coming in. I will promise all those people that we come back to the questions. For now, I would like to close this one off. Again, I would like to thank Yuji Ma, Fernando Bellesi, Federico Brugnoli for their time and their expertise in today's webinar. As I said, we will come back to the questions. We thank you very much for your interest, and we really request you also to consider how an LCA and how a better understanding of chemicals, of leathers, of different leathers can help you to make the right messaging to the brands, to the consumers, and so on. So it's good to really envision that for yourself, understand that it's a difficult topic which needs time and investments. For now, I would like to thank you again for your interest. I wish you a very good rest of the day. And if you have any more questions, please do reach out to us for the answers. Thank you very much and goodbye.